Hello, and welcome to Bite Size Legal, where we tackle legal issues one bite at a time. My name is Drew Jenkins, and I'm an attorney licensed in Georgia and Alabama. And today, we are going to take another bite out of corporations. We're continuing our series on starting your business to ring in the new year, and we've been walking through the various business entities that you can choose from. We spent the last couple of weeks focusing on corporations. Last week, we spoke about corporate taxation and how it's different from all the other entities that are available. And today we're going to dig just a little bit more into what makes a corporation different from the other business entities. And one of the big ones that you always have to look at starts right at the very formation. So when you start other business entities that must be registered, such as an LLC or an LLP, you're going to have generally what is called a certificate of formation. But when it comes to a corporation, you are actually going to incorporate the entity. So as it relates to Georgia and Alabama, you're going to have what are known as articles of incorporation that are going to be filed. And different states have different names for it, but the corporation stands separate and apart. So in the same way that a corporate entity is its own separate thing for tax purposes, you're going to find at state level it's also going to be treated as something separate and apart from the other entity selections. One of the biggest ones that come up regularly is what are known as the corporate formalities. So another way that corporations are different from partnerships or LLCs or any of the others is that you must abide by something known as corporate formalities. So if you want to get the protection of your entity, you're going to have to do some things that are going to be different than the other ones. And the first one is you're going to have to decide at the outset when you create your bylaws, are you going to be shareholder driven or are you going to be controlled by the board of directors? And this isn't as minor a thing as you may believe. It's going to have a significant weight on the way that you operate. So for a corporation, you're going to have to treat it quite literally as something separate from you, and you're going to have to hold regular meetings, right? And the question is whether these meetings are going to be held first with the board of directors who have decision to make authorities, or whether you are going to sort of squeeze it down and just allow the shareholders to act directly in the operating of your company. So obviously, if you're small, a good practice tip would be to say, hey, we are a shareholder-run company, right? We're not even going to bother with a board of directors. We're just going to go straight for the shareholders, and we as a small group are going to make all the decisions, right? Or if you're larger or you're looking at becoming larger, you can say, hey, we're going to go ahead and create, like most of the large companies, the shareholders are going to vote on specific items. We're going to hold annual meetings for them. But ultimately, the ship is going to be driven by the board of directors. And then obviously your CEO or your president is going to be handling the day-to-day operations of the company. Which leads to the next point, is you're going to have to hold meetings. So if you choose to have directors, you're going to have to decide how many you have and how many you're going to need to make certain decisions. And even then, ultimately, since the shareholders are the owners, you're also going to have to hold an annual shareholders meeting. And you're going to have to make sure that you have a secretary to keep meeting minutes. Now, the reason I point all of this out is because if you create another entity type, such as a partnership or an LLC that's taxed as a partnership, you don't have to do any of this stuff, right? You're just sort of allowed to operate how you see fit. And so this goes a long way, again, to showing how corporations are going to be sort of a different animal entirely from the other entities that we're going to be talking about later. So number one is when you form it, you're going to have an articles of incorporation. You're going to have to abide by your particular state jurisdictional rules on the creation of the entity. Your practice at number one is you're going to have to determine whether you're going to be a shareholder operated company or whether you're going to be a board of directors operated company. If you're small, I would advise skipping the board of directors entirely. It's a whole nother layer of minutes and meetings you're going to have to keep track of that you honestly can do without. And then your other corporate formalities are you're going to have to make sure that you have a position known as treasurer that's filled by someone. You're going to have to make sure that you have a position called secretary that's filled by someone. And the reason is because the corporation is so much older than the other entity types, right? And it was the original limited liability entity for people that wanted to be in business. And so there's just an enormous amount of case law, and there is a very well-developed body of statutory law that governs this, both at the state and at the federal level, which we'll find out later. It doesn't even exist for LLCs, so it's a little bit more of a Wild West. Another thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to sort of operating the corporation is to make sure that you understand how people sign. and we're going to have a whole section, a whole talk devoted to signing. But when it comes to corporations, typically you're going to need two people to sign, and this is going to be a lot different than your other entity types. Typically, things are going to be signed by your president and then sort of authorized or also executed by your secretary, sometimes your treasurer, your vice president. And a lot of jurisdictions still have what are known as corporate seals, which do not exist for non-corporations. So you're going to need to check your jurisdiction to see whether or not when you sign things, you're also going to have to stamp down a corporate seal. The state of Alabama got rid of their corporate seal long ago, so we don't have to worry about that for them. But these are some other topics. So the bites that we're taking today are, remember that if you form a corporation, you must abide by corporate formalities. What this means is you must hold meetings. You must make sure that you have minutes of those meetings. You must make sure that your positions of treasurer, secretary, president, vice president, CEO, whatever you want to call them, are filled and they're being operated. You need to check with your state laws regarding how things have to be executed. Be aware that for corporations, unlike others, you might have to have things executed by more than one person. And I hope you find this useful and enjoyable. As always, feel free to leave comments below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching in WeChat, feel free to leave in Thread. And I look forward to seeing you next week.